So just a bit about me. David Ashton's my name. I've been a business advisor with Business Station since 2014, and that's my business, corporate supremacy. So I do all sort of back of house business services, so tenders and grants and health and safety, all the management systems and business and strategic planning and the like, procurement. So I've worked in property industry, construction, mining services and state and local government, and I've consulted to a broad range of clients in those industries as well since starting the business in February 2014. So Business Station is the deliverer of the Australian Small Business Advisory Service. So take advantage of the services that they provide. You can access up to 24 hours of free or low cost advisory services on any aspect of business management, so finance, IT, HR, marketing, social media marketing, anything to do with running your business. And this program is funded by the Commonwealth Government, so it allows you to access advisory services through Business Station on a range of business matters, whether it be internet or digital matters to do with your business, or general business advisory, which is where I fall into it. So what we're going to go through today, we're going to look at what is tendering. I use tender as a catch-all term, but we'll go through some terminology. We've also got going to look at where you can find tender opportunities through digital and other platforms. Look at the process of deciding to write a tender and things that you should consider before you go down this path. Because the process of submitting a tender can be time consuming, so it's important that you pick the right tender. So once we've made that decision to tender, we'll look at the process of preparing your tender submission, and then once we've done that, we'll look at the next stage. Once the tenders have been submitted after the tender closing date, looking at it from the buyer's point of view, how will tenders be assessed, and then we're going to look at management systems, so things like quality, safety, health, information management, some of the sort of questions that you're likely to get around in your tender around your organisational capacity. And then we'll just finish up with some questions if you have any. So the other thing too, in terms of this, I've part of my experience as being a procurement manager. I've sat on both sides of the fence. So I've been a procurement manager where I've put packages together to go to market, and sat on selection panels to award tenders. So I'm going to bring that experience to it as well. So I'm going to be talking as if I'm on a selection panel and giving you advice and guidance as to what I'd be looking for in a qualifying, complying tender, and one that's likely to get you over the line. So that's the basis that I'll come from. And as I said, if you've got any questions as we go, I may be getting to your answer, but I will answer them for you. So let's get stuck into it. So what is tendering? As I said, I use this as a catch-all term, but it's a formal, structured invitation. It's very rules-based in terms of the supply of goods and services. So the buyer, government agency, local government, private industry, they'll put together a scope of works or a specification and some rules around how they're going to assess the bids, and then release that to the market. And then from your point of view, it's the process of responding to that invitation within a finite deadline and within the rules that the tender specifies. So rules around, closing date and time, information to be provided, questions to be answered, compliance criteria, selection criteria, and price basis. So, and obviously from a buyer's point of view, they want to encourage a greater competition and increased pool of organisations putting in bids. Government tenders very process and rules based around openness, accountability and the like. Private industry, same process, depending on the scale of the tender, they still will go through a defined procurement process, but obviously they don't have the same checks and balances in place that a government agency would have. So types of tender processes, as I said, I use tender in the catch-all, but this is some terminology that you're likely to come across. So expression of interest, two-stage process. So this is sort of initial, I guess, fact-finding mission to identify prospective suppliers that could likely deliver the supply of goods or services, particularly in the case of a new purchase or service being offered, say in government. They want to get an idea of who's out in the market. It could also be building up a list of pre-qualified suppliers that meet certain selection criteria that they would be after. And then once they've identified those suppliers, then they may very well go out to a restricted tender just to those suppliers that have met the pre-qualification requirements. Request for quote, so smaller scale supply at a lower dollar limit. So it could be, ring up and get 3 quotes for something that's worth $1,000. It could be something worth $100,000. It really depends on the dollar value, and then obviously the complexity of the purchase will determine the amount of rigour applied to the selection and awarding of a contract. In local government in WA, for example, anything over $150,000 has to be publicly advertised, and anything in state government, anything over $250,000 has to be publicly advertised. And requests for quotes can be verbal or in writing, depending on the dollar value and the buying rules of the organisation. So requests for tender, so large scale, but importantly, the scope or the specification is clearly defined. So the agency knows exactly what it wants to buy, and you need to quote on that accordingly. Request for proposal, on the other hand, it's not necessarily clearly defined. They've got an outcome that they want to achieve, but they've they're seeking advice from the market as to the best way to do that. So design and construct tenders are a good example of that, where they're looking for organisations to submit proposals on design outcomes. So you need to respond or outline the solution in your response, price it accordingly, and then answer all the compliance and selection criteria questions around that. So just be mindful of that terminology, because that will determine the type of procurement process that it is and the dollar value involved. So now we're going to look at where you can find tender opportunities. And what I'm going to show you is free subscription services. You can pay companies to do a sweep of all tender advertising websites that meet your criteria and send you email alerts. But these ones that I'm going to provide you are free of charge to access and to register your details. So it's all done via the internet these days. So register for various tender websites. You can subscribe to tender email alerts, so you'll plug in your the types of tenders that you're interested in receiving information about, and then you'll receive an automatically generated email outlining any tenders that meet that criteria. I mean, I get those emails just about every day. So register also with the individual local governments. So, you know, in Perth Metro, there's about 36 councils you can register for. So you need to go and look at the tender websites for each individual local government. And importantly, build a relationship with the buyer. So if you are targeting, you know, local government, you know, give them a call, speak to their procurement team, ask to be placed on a supplier register, send them a letter, a copy of your brochures or anything like that. Get yourself known before you tender, because as I mentioned earlier, not a lot of the tenders are publicly advertised because they don't meet the dollar limit. So you know, you might get an email out of the blue asking you to quote on a particular job or a telephone, and I've had that as well, because I've sent in the past letters to or correspondence to local governments asking to be placed on a platform, on a preferred supplier list. So build that relationship as well. And likewise, if you're targeting private industry, get yourself known to them, understand the organisation and what they're trying to achieve, and then align yourself to that. Now I know I've mentioned WA, but I'll also be providing some information about tender websites in Queensland and Northern Territory, given that we've got people from those states in this webinar. So yeah, register free of charge with the relevant websites that we'll go through now. So in WA, Tenders WA is the primary platform for all state government tenders. So you can register, just go to Tenders WA and you can see the home screen there to the right, and just you know, sign up to that and then go through the rigmarole of identifying what tenders you want to access. The WA Department of Finance, all tenders are managed by the department where an agency doesn't have delegated authority to do so. But they've got quite an extensive website on government procurement and how government procures goods and services. So you can go there and look at you know, the whole process of government buying. They've got details about what government buys, common use agreements that they set up, and the like. So it's quite a comprehensive website on how to tender, or how government tenders for goods and services. So as part of your research, I'd recommend you go and have a look at that website. So Commonwealth, so federal government tenders, AusTender is the main portal there, and likewise you can sign up to obtain email alerts for tenders. Government procurement for ICT, they've set up a separate website for that purpose, so you need to go and register for both if you're in the ICT industry. Otherwise, all tenders are through the general AusTender portal. So national projects, so Gateway ICN, that's targeting national and, you know, across all the states. So there might very well be state-based projects in the private industry. So a lot of mining and construction type tenders. You can access that, again, free of charge. You can register your details. Other platforms, I don't have any association with these platforms, but 360 Providers Portal, some local governments use that platform to you know, as a means for advertising their tenders and managing tender uploads. Vendor Panel, WA Local Government Association. So a lot of the local governments use a platform called Tenderlink in WA. So you need to go to the local government website, yeah, look for their tender page, and then that'll outline how you can go about registering to receive tender invites for that council. In Western Australia, there's still in the West Australian newspaper, Wednesdays and Saturdays, they advertise, local government tenders are advertised, anything over 150,000 must be, the Local Government Act requires all tenders to be advertised in a newspaper circulating in the state. So that's why you'll receive those, you'll see those adverts in the paper. And a lot of the construction companies advertise that they're tendering on a project, and they're seeking pricing and other information from prospective subcontractors. So you'll also see those adverts in the West Australian as well. So that's the West Australian newspaper on Saturdays and Sundays. If you're in other states, look at your equivalent newspapers, also national newspapers and regional newspapers advertise for tenders. And I'd also, which I do mention earlier in the slides, in terms of building that relationship with your local government, for example, connect up to these organisations on social media, so LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever they use, because they often advertise their tenders and quotes through that. And I have found some tender opportunities and actually won tenders by finding them on their various social media platforms. So if you're in Queensland, they are the websites there where you can access tenders for from the Queensland government. AusTender is the same website across the country. But yeah, a lot of the government, federal government contracts, they may very well be national contracts, but they'll have a state-based component where you can, tender for either the full national contract or just the state component of that. As I said, build that relationship with the buyer. And likewise, if you're in the Northern Territory, that's the website for all the Northern Territory tenders. So go and register for those. And if you're in other states, you can register for these websites as well. You don't have to be based in the state to register, and you can still submit tenders in other states as well if you're looking to expand nationally. So you just need to go and register with each individual tender website. So as I said, I will send you a copy of the presentation, so you will have access to those links to the websites there. So now we're going to look at the process for deciding to submit the tender. And what I mean by this here is that, when you're going through, you receive your emails or whatever about tenders, and you come across one that looks interesting. Generally, they'll just provide a heading and a brief introduction as to what it's about. But it's not until you go through the documentation that you get an understanding of whether it's the right type of tender for you. So, if you're in that situation, download the documentation from the website. You can do that free of charge, and review the documentation. So you need to go through it in fine detail, get a clear understanding of the scope, all the specifications and requirements of what they're looking to buy. Look at all the criteria that you need to meet, particularly things like the compliance criteria, the pre-qualification requirements, because if you don't meet those, then there's no point putting in a tender, because you're just not going to have your bid considered. You must meet a pre-qualification requirement if a tender's got one. A license you might have to have a particular license or registration or do something that the rules require for the tender. If you don't have those licenses or registrations or follow the rules, your bid's not going to be considered. So be very clear across the compliance and the selection criteria. Read the instructions about the tender process, so the rules around how they're going to assess them, what the closing date and time, how you're to deliver the document, the instructions around providing information, and then the rules that they're going to abide by in terms of selecting their preferred supplier. And they'll also have details about the buyer, and what they're trying to achieve. So so again, go through that document and fine tooth comb and be very clear as to everything that you need to know to be able to put in a good bid. And if there's something there that you read, seek clarification. So determine what the buyer is looking to buy, determine what type of organisation the buyer is looking to engage. And what I mean by that is that pre-qualification, do you meet that requirement? And then again, if you're not sure, seek clarification. So there will be contact details of people that you can ring or send an email to where you can address your questions and seek answers to that or clarification on any aspect of the tender document. So make sure you do that, because it is important that you are across the detail, because that's going to determine how you prepare your document, the information you provide, and also importantly the price that you're going to charge. So in terms of the rules around tenders, one of the rules might be to attend a briefing session. And these are meetings that they have with prospective suppliers. So they normally happen, during the tender. Well, they do happen during the tender opening period. So they'll get all the suppliers in the room and, talk more about the tender, provide any additional information, provide an opportunity to ask for questions and receive answers to those or seek clarification. The advantage for you is you'll get an idea as to who else is likely to bid and how many people, how many businesses are likely to bid, so you get an idea of who your competitors are and who you're going to be up against. Now, I mentioned that these are part of the tender rules. So if the tender rules say the briefing session is mandatory, it means that you must attend and you need to, and that's a pre-qualification requirement. So if you don't attend the mandatory briefing session, then there's no point you putting in a bid because you haven't met the rules around the tender. If it's non-mandatory, it's up to you, but I'd recommend you go anyway, because you do get to ask questions, meet the decision makers, get an idea of who you're likely to compete against, and importantly gives you an opportunity to analyze the competition. So this is an important element as well. So find out who else is likely to bid. Find out who the existing supplier is, and get an understanding of your competitors, and because you need to determine where you're at and who your likely to competitors are. I mean, I've been to briefing sessions for contracts that I thought I might want to tender for, but when I've been to the briefing session, I've seen the organisations that are likely to bid as well. I've sort of thought to myself, well, I really can't compete with them. So I've decided not to put in a bid. But again, what that last dot point, what other businesses could you collaborate with? Well, this is where a briefing session could be useful, because you never know who you might meet there. I mean, an example, in my point of view, with Business Station is that in 2014, when the state government tendered for the Business Local program, which is a similar advisory service program to ASBAS, I went along to a non-mandatory briefing session looking to tender for that program myself. I sat in the room and there was companies like Deloitte's and Business Station and Business Foundations and RSM, Bird Cameron and the like. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to compete with these companies. So I decided not to put in a bid, but I'd met the CEO of Business Station there, and I rang her up a couple of days later, and I said, I'm not going to put in a bid, but would you be interested in having me and my other consultant that was working for me at the time come in as part of your team as your advisors, and we can deliver a range of advisory services for you. And we met with her and she agreed and got the tender, and here I am 7 years later still doing advisory sessions through Business Station. So there's an example where I thought a bit differently, having gone to a briefing session and decided not to put in a tender, but still managed to get work out of it by going about it a different way and collaborating with other businesses. So you need to really, that they say that there's 4 key factors to winning a tender. Positioning. So you need to understand the buyer, the opportunity and marketplace. So do your research, read through the tender document, get an understanding of the organisation that's tendering, look at their annual reports, their website, look at what other goods and services they buy, get an understanding about them. So compliance, you need to tick all the boxes and supply all the information. So that's important. Do you meet the pre-qualification requirements? Have you provided all the information that they've asked for? Have you answered all the questions? You've got to do that. Persuasion. So it's a marketing exercise. You're trying to sell a product or a service. You need to market your product or service. You need to, persuade them that you can deliver what they want, when they want it, at a price they're prepared to pay, and that you're a credible organisation. And we'll talk about that a bit later on. And then you need to, your price, so do your research on your price. How do you price your goods and services? Is it consistent with the market? Is it one that's likely to get you over the line? How can you find out information about the price? Well, they're not going to tell you in the tender, although some tenders that I've had, we say local government's received a grant, they'll specify the dollar value of the contract, but it's rare. But I mean, local government tenders, I mean, I've tendered for a project with one council, and it was for a strategic plan. And I went to the I downloaded the council's budget for that year, and I saw a line item there, strategic plan consultancy, $20,000. So I figured, well, that's the budget that they've set aside. So I put in my price around that dollar figure. So yeah, it's just a matter of doing your research, understanding your markup and price basis, and then researching the market. So you generally need all four of those factors to win a tender. And then, ask yourself, are you tender ready? So the next couple of slides, I've got a list of questions that that you can should ask yourself. And they're sort of the types of questions that they're going to want to know the answers to in a tender anyway. So, how does your business address the aims and objectives, the solution? How do you compete on costs? Your skills and expertise of your business and key personnel. Your resilience and ability to respond quickly to events. Your relationship management, flexibility. This last point, will the buyer have any concerns about my business? This is getting down to that credibility. Government in particular, very risk averse, doesn't want any issues cropping up during the life of the contract that's going to cause them any grief, and that's why they'll do their due diligence. So things like financial stability. Are you secure? Can you pay all your debts when they fall due? They're the sort of questions that you're likely to get, and they're certainly going to do some research on your business before they award you a contract. So look at your products and services. What's your methodology for delivering the tender outcomes? The benefit to the buyer of your services and products. Identify any risks involved in the tender. You might get a question along these lines in the tender itself. I've had that where they've asked you to, one of the questions was to outline the risks involved and to develop a mitigation strategy. Performance measurement. How will you ensure the success of the supply of goods and services? Details about your referees. So you need to demonstrate a good track record of success, and identify any value add opportunities as well. So you can put in what's called an alternative tender. So, they've gone to a request for tender or proposal. You put in a complying tender. You've addressed their needs and put forward a particular proposal on how they can solve a problem. So you've met the compliance requirements around the tender, but there's nothing stopping you from suggesting alternative solutions as well. You just need to put in a complying tender in the first instance. So identify your win themes. So what's so special about your business? So get an understanding of your strengths and weaknesses, compare them against others. Again, that's that marketing exercise. What's competitive advantage? What's so good about your business that would convince me that you can deliver what I want when I want it at the price I'm prepared to pay? So then when you've gone through that whole exercise, you've attended a briefing session. As I said, either mandatory, you must go, non-mandatory, it's up to you, but I'd recommend you go anyway. Businesses, mandatory briefing sessions are commonly held for facilities management, construction type tenders, say cleaning contract, they want you to go and look at the building or buildings that you're required to clean. Construction, they might want you to go on site and have a look at the where the building has to be built, or it's a renovation or design or something. They might want you to go to the building that they need to do some work on. So so they're the types of sort of site inspections that they would have as part of the briefing sessions. Others, it could just be get all the prospective suppliers in the room and have an information session. So you've been to the briefing sessions, you've read through the documentation, you've done your own internal assessment as to whether you're ready to put in a tender. You've identified your win themes. Once you've gone through all that exercise, then you need to consider and decide whether to submit the tender. And obviously do this earlier in the piece, don't wait until the last minute, because you're now going, if you decide to submit the tender, you've got to sit down and write the thing up. So, look at things like your financial capacity. Do you have the resources to deliver the project? Is it consistent with your strategic direction? Do you have the time to actually write the tender in the first place, or are you too busy doing your day-to-day job? Do you need to get someone in to help you out to do that? And, importantly, do you meet the pre-qualification requirements? So, that's the first thing you should really look at, because if it does require you to have a certain license or a registration or attendance at a mandatory briefing session, if you don't have any of that, then you've either got to get it or there's no point putting in a bid. So, that's the key component. Not every tender has a pre-qualification requirement either. So, look for that as well. And as I said, make that decision as soon as possible, so you can get on and, if you haven't made the decision to put in a tender, you can get on and do the work that's needed, which we're going to talk about now. So we're going to talk about the actual process of sitting down and writing your tender submission. I almost see this as a project in itself. It has a start and an end date. You've got to bring in various components to prepare your document. So I'd say treat it as a project. Have a project team or a person to manage the process. It could just be yourself, but you need to, whether they be people internally or externally, you need to gather the information needed to put the document together. So, the strategy around what you're trying to do, looking at your methodology and the like. What's the strategy you're going to employ to deliver the goods or services? Document design and presentation. Who's going to, someone to, write the document, collate the information. You need to speak to subject matter experts. So if there's questions around legal, you might need to speak to legal people, you might need to speak to, you know, your operations team, depending on who you are. As I said, it could just be you that does everything and is everything in your business, but you need to be across all the aspects of the tender, and that's why it's important to read through the document in detail to ascertain what they're looking for, and then you can go and get the advice that you need. So you may need to seek, you know, pricing from external sources to help put together your price. So do that early in the piece. Don't wait until the last minute. I mean, those adverts that I showed you earlier in the paper, those construction companies, you know, they're tendering for goods. They've got a deadline that they've got to meet. So they're seeking pricing from subcontractors to help them inform their price that they're going to charge the head contractor. So, or the principal. So, you know, get all the information that you need early in the piece, and you know, if it's and a lot of the information they want is standard stuff, you know, CVs and the like, which I'll talk about in this side. So, you know, gather your internal and external inputs early in the process, and gather the information. So, you know, a lot of the stuff they're going to need, you know, the same sort of stuff for each tender. So set up maybe a tender file that has all your corporate details, your insurances, you know, referees, testimonials, you know, CVs in a standard format. Develop some case studies of work that you've done in the past. You know, outline your methodology. So yeah, develop a tender file, because a lot of this sort of information they're going to be asking in each tender. So, and then, you know, you've got to go through and complete the tender requirements. So, you know, in this sort of order, corporate details, so, you know, name, address, ABN, etc. You need to then address the pre-qualification requirements, if there are any, the compliance criteria, which are generally yes and no type answers. The selection or the qualitative criteria. This is the nuts and bolts. This is where you tell the story about your business, you know, how you're going to do it. And I'll go through the questions that you're likely to get a bit later, but, you know, this is the marketing component where you sit down and tell the story about how you run your business and how you're going to deliver the products and services when they want, you know, when they want you to be able to deliver them. So. And then the price, so, you know, be very clear on what your price basis is. There will be a table that you need to complete. It might be a separate spreadsheet or a table within the tender document, but address the price requirements in the form that's requested. Don't go making up your own sort of table for that. They don't necessarily need all your working documents to arrive at your price. They just need the final price that you come up with. So now during the tender opening period, so it might be 3 or 4 weeks before from the time they you know, you download the documentation to the time that it's the closing date. So where a prospective respondent has asked a question, or even at briefing sessions, they are required to release the answers to those questions or additional information to everyone that's requested a copy. So when you download the documentation, say from Tenders WA, you will automatically receive these addendum alerts. You must read them and acknowledge receipt of them in your final tender submission, because, and the importance of these addendum is to provide more information or clarification, or even amend things that they've picked up in the document. And it could, if you don't read it, then it, you know, you might be missing out on some important information that may impact your price or how you respond to the tender. So very important to read this additional information. So, you know, set out your document structure, you know, same logical sequence using the same heading. So what I mean by that is, you know, take their questions and use that as a heading and then give an answer. You know, the Tenders WA documentation, for example, you can almost use as a template to answer your questions. use simple language, avoid waffle and repetition. So, as someone sitting on a selection panel, I'm not just reading your document, I might be reading another dozen or more tender submissions. So make it easier for me to read, make it easier for me to find the information that I need for the questions that I want answered. Don't just write page and page after text, and use persuasive techniques. I mean, you're trying to convince me to give you a job, basically, and why should I give you that job when I've got another dozen or more tender submissions to read that could equally do the job as well? So, as I said, persuasive techniques, key messages articulated well. Make it easy to read. Don't just write page and page after text of text. Use graphs, tables, photos. Before and after photos, for example, charts and diagrams. So you may very well be able to present an answer using a flow chart, for example, or a Gantt chart. If they're looking for a project, an outline of your project methodology and schedule, you could quite easily answer that within the context of putting together a Gantt chart, and then some explanatory notes around that. Headings, subheadings, short paragraphs, bullet points. So not just long-winded sentences and paragraphs. You can split it up, make it easy for me to read. Include a table of contents and number the pages. So if you do have attachments, make sure they're clearly labelled and easily found. So reference them in the body of the document. So if you're making a statement and you want to have an attachment relating to that, make sure you're putting that, refer to attachment number 1, title on page, whatever it is. So, and writing the document, it's all about building confidence in your ability. So having read through your tender submission, I am confident that you can deliver what I want when I want it, at a price that I'm prepared to pay, because it's consistent with the budget that we've set, and that I am confident in your capacity as a business to be able to do these things that you say you can do. And how you build that confidence in your capacity, I'll talk about a bit later. So one thing you might want to include with your tenders is a cover letter or an executive summary, just a short introduction, summarise your win themes, any administrative aspects, who the contact person is from your organisation, that type of thing. A commitment statement to making the success of the supply of services or products, contact details, and have it signed by the most senior person in the organisation. And before you submit it, have a critical review. Maybe want to get an independent peer review, so maybe get someone that hasn't been involved in the process to have a review. Ask yourself, are there strong win themes? Does it answer all the questions? Is the depth of the information appropriate to the weightings given for each question? So, 5 questions, 100%. One question might be worth 10%, another 30%, that type of thing. Is it logical, easy to follow and direct? So, yes, is it, when I say direct, does it direct me to, aspects of the business, aspects of the tender where I can find information? Is it easy to read? So, that logical sequence. Is it internally consistent and technically correct? So, you're not saying one thing on one page and contradicting yourself on another. Have you included the correct information? So if you're including some plans or diagrams with your tender, are they the correct version or the latest version? Does it have all the information required? That's important. So, if it asks for copies of CVs for your key personnel, make sure that you include them. And then package and deliver. So as part of the buying rule, the tender rules, the tender document will specify how you're to deliver the document. Most of them these days are delivered, up through the portal through Tenders WA or AusTender or whatever. So understand the platform requirements. So they might specify the number of documents you can upload, the file size of those documents. So submit the tender as per the buyer's requirements, and importantly, deliver it by the closing date and time. Otherwise, because your bid's just not going to be considered. It says 2 o'clock Friday, you deliver it by 2 o'clock Friday. Don't wait until 1:55 to upload it. I always try to aim, the day before. It gives you a bit of time. You don't want to be rushing around on the day that it's due, because you always guarantee the internet will go down or something will happen. And obtain a delivery receipt. So normally when you're uploaded, you'll receive an automatic email saying date and time that you've uploaded it. As I said, most tenders are now done through the internet. You will get the odd requirement, particularly say in country local governments, for example, where they may want you to email the document to a particular email address, or in some cases I had a requirement to post hard copies, but that's becoming increasingly rare these days, but it still may happen. And some you may have to deliver to the tender box located at the front counter. So that's your role in the tender process finished. You've done all the hard work and you've delivered your tender by the closing date and time. Now it's over to people like myself on the selection panel to go through the process of awarding a contract. So all tenders are assessed against the criteria referred to in the request document. So the selection criteria, or the qualitative criteria as they call it. We look at the strengths and weaknesses of your bid. We ascertain whether you've understood the qualitative requirements. So so when we talk about that, we go, have you understood the scope of works or the specification? Have you understood the requirements of the tender in terms of how the tender is going to work, how the contract will work? Have you demonstrated your capacity to meet the tender requirements, and how confident we are in your capacity to do so? And the level of confidence of the evaluation panel has that the respondent will be able to meet each of the requirements. So that's really all it's about, and I've stressed that throughout this presentation so far, is that having read your tender submission, I'm confident that you can deliver what I want when I want it at the price I'm prepared to pay, and that I'm also confident in your organisational capacity to do that. So the success of your tender will be determined how well you address the qualitative criteria. As I said earlier, this is the nuts and bolts. So you need to adhere to the requirements and meet the criteria in order to increase your chances of winning. So if you look at so if you look at the first part of it is the compliance criteria. So this is your yes and no answers. This is where we just do that assessment, that due diligence on you, that things like your financial capacity. Have you met the pre-qualification requirements? Have you met the conditions of participation in the tender, provided certain information? Then we might do some external checks on your business, financial security, agreement to the contract. So you need to give generally a yes or no type answer to these questions, and depending on how you answer it, it may cause us to investigate further. So for example, a local government question you might get, are you able to pay your debts when they fall due? If you answer no, well, that's going to raise a bit of a red flag. So we don't want to sign you up to a 3-year contract and find that you go broke halfway through it. So the selection qualitative criteria questions that you're likely to get. So organisational capacity to deliver the goods or services. So your management systems, how you actually manage your organisation, you're going to be assessed on that. Experience and qualifications of your key personnel. So, provide CVs and give an explanation as to the experience of your personnel as it relates to the tender. So, history of completing similar projects or supply products. So, this is where you can develop some case studies of work that you've done in the past that relate to the tender, and use these as an example of your capacity to deliver the project because you've delivered similar projects in the past for other organisations. So your understanding of the requirements of the scope or specification, you need to outline that you do actually, or demonstrate that you understand what it is I'm trying to purchase. And you need to outline your methodology for the supply of that. So if it's a, say, a construction project, for example, you might want to include a Gantt chart that outlines, the step-by-step approach that you're going to take to delivering the project from, the date of order to the date of completion. These questions may be weighted. So as I mentioned earlier, 100%, one question might be worth 5%, another 30%, and they will be point scored. So the way it works is that the selection panel will read the tender submissions as individually. So there might be 3 or 4 people on the panel. They will point score each of the questions in the qualitative criteria between, in state government example, between 0 and 9. And there's a particular criteria that you have to meet to get a certain point score. Then the panel will come together and then they'll discuss each member's individual score and try and come up with a group score that, out of 9. So, and then that's the score that they'll use to rank the organisations from the preferred supplier at number 1 down to the least preferred supplier. And then when they've done that, they'll then look at the price. So they'll take the business or the organisation that's had the highest point score, and then they'll look at their price to see if it's within the budget that they've set, and if so, that they'll appoint that preferred supplier. So when they say, lowest price not necessarily accepted, that is true. They don't always accept the lowest price. It is assessed on value for money, but they will try and get the cheapest compliant option available to them. So, if they, you might come in at the lowest price, but you might be a very lowly ranked company on that point score. So they're unlikely to go for you. But, if they can get the lowest price and still be comfortable with the organisation that they've selected, they'll go for the lowest price. In local government, for example, the price forms part of the qualitative criteria, and that points to that weighting. So price might be worth 40% of the total tender of 100%. So have a look at that as well. That they don't include price in the weightings for state government tenders or federal government. So so you need to demonstrate why your price will deliver the best value as well. So price basis, depending on the nature of the contract, could be a schedule of rates, lump sum, time payments, hourly rate or day rate, per product, cost plus. So again, the tender document will specify the price basis. So other things that may impact on the award of the contract, so local content and regional price preferences, buy local policies. In WA, over like $20 million, you've got to have an industry participation strategy. And then there's incentives given to Aboriginal and disability service providers as well. So just the tender document will outline the rules for these aspects relating to the price and delivery of the service. So when they talk about local content and regional price preferences, it's looking at contracts delivered in regional areas. They're aiming to engage local suppliers to deliver the products or service So they'll give them a price preference or a discount type thing in relation to companies that may be competing from the metropolitan area. So after the contract award, so will the selection panel will select a preferred supplier. It'll then, obviously advise them of that and enter into negotiations. If those negotiations fall through, they'll go to the next preferred supplier and go from there. There might be, as part of that process, a need to shortlist, and then they'll invite the shortlisted suppliers into a presentation. Again, that's all depending on the buying rules. So the buying rules will specify whether they go straight to a contract award or whether they'll shortlist and go through that process first. So if successful, the finer details of the contract will be sorted out and signed. Hopefully that's you, and you'll get yourself a contract to supply the goods and services. If you are successful, you'll also be advised of that and who the successful supplier is. I recommend you seek feedback on your submission. If you are unsuccessful, you will have that capacity to do so. You can ring them up and seek feedback on your submission. Was it well read? Was it well written, easy to understand? Did it answer all the questions? Look for ways that you can improve to try and win the next tender. So that's what it's all about. But certainly if the opportunity for feedback is given, I would take it. So that's the tender process from start to finish. So I've given you some information on how to find tenders, what is a tender. We've looked at, are you tender ready, and the things that you need to satisfy yourself on. We've looked at deciding to write the tender and the process that you should go through there. We've also looked at the how to write your tender, and then the selection process that the selection panel will go through to award a tender. One of the things that I've been talking about throughout this presentation is your organisational capacity. So it might be one thing to say that you can do these things, it's another thing to demonstrate that you can actually do it. And that's what we mean by organisational capacity. So one of the ways that the types of questions that you may get in a tender that will help determine whether you do have the organisational capacity is around your management systems and procedures. So how you actually run your business. So you're going to get all sorts of questions around this. Your capacity to supply the goods and services. Having robust management systems in place is critical to demonstrating this capacity. So they're going to ask you questions around, quality management, safety and environment, information security and the like. It may be a pre-qualification requirement to have a certain systems in place and certify it. So you might have to have, say, ISO 9001 certification, quality management. So it's rare, but that they'll make it a pre-qualification, but you certainly will get a question asking, do you have a system consistent with the requirements of those standards? And having good systems and procedures in place, I think, is good for business for a whole range of reasons. I am conducting some other webinars this week on safety management and information security management a bit later on, if you want further details on those systems. So some of the questions you're going to get are around, your quality management, what are the processes you put in place to meet customer requirements and enhance satisfaction, how you're going to manage the contract, your customer management processes. You're going to get questions on environmental policies and procedures, particularly, those involved in construction, mining, and the like, even cleaning, what type of chemicals you use. But this is looking at some procedures and policies around environmental protection and how your business interacts with the natural environment. Safety management, so That's the new safety standard, ISO 45001. So how do you manage safety in the workplace? Local government in WA does send out quite an extensive safety survey that you have to fill out. So you do need to demonstrate that you've got a safety policy and some procedures in place. Information security management. So yeah, personal information of your clients, corporate information. How do you manage it? How do you protect it? What's your record keeping systems, your privacy policies, all those sorts of things. Governance, so, this is again, what sort of internal controls do you put in place? Code of conduct for your employees. And the like, code of conduct, fraud and corruption, corporate social responsibility. You're increasingly getting a lot of questions around corporate social responsibility, your employment practices, your commitment to local employment, particularly sorry, if the contract is in a regional area, economic development, involvement in the community, Aboriginal employment, disability employment, diversity and inclusion, all these sorts of things you're starting to get questions on in tenders. So be mindful of that you've got some responses to that and evidence that you've actually done things in this regard. So risk management, you need to be across that. Business continuity is important, particularly for smaller businesses. If you're a single person consultant, you need to demonstrate how you're going to deliver a project, what sort of backup business continuity that you've got in place. So that's where collaboration can come in handy. You've got extra people. I always, if I'm putting in a tender, try and bring in some other people onto my team, so it's not just me, it's a team of people. HR management, so your recruitment selection processes, financial policies and procedures, and then protecting business information, so your information security management becoming increasingly important, and particularly in government where they've got things like the Privacy Act, State Records Act and Freedom of Information Act. So just be across, you might get some questions around your management of record keeping and document control. So in conclusion then, yeah, tendering is a great way to earn new business, can be time and resource intensive. It's one component of your business development and marketing strategy, so keep doing all the other things that you do. Pick the right tenders that you think you can win. 10 briefing sessions, regardless of whether they're mandatory or not. Treat the process as a project so that you deliver it on the due date and time. Develop win themes and reinforce these throughout the submission. Have in place robust management systems to demonstrate your organisational capacity. Be particular about presentation and structure. Critical review and proofread of the submission before you send it. And importantly, deliver it by the due date and time. Otherwise, you've done a lot of work for nothing. So that's it. Thank you for participating. That's my contact details. I'm happy to do a follow-up advisory session on a particular tender that you're working on. Look out for other workshops and webinars that I run on management systems, because I can tell you now, you will not win a tender unless you can demonstrate good management systems in your business, whether it be safety, environment, quality, information security, or whatever. So look at how you run your business and document your processes. They don't need to be long-winded documents, but just some simple procedures and policies to help run your business, but also demonstrate your capacity in this regard. So I'll leave, we've gone over time a bit, but I'll leave it open for 5 minutes if you've got any questions, but otherwise, thanks for your participation and good luck.
That's great, thanks David.
Yeah. So you got any questions on that? Or...
No, I've taken a lot of notes, and I'll be absorbing them. Stew over those, and then maybe there'll be some later. But for now, it's yeah, it's quite succinct. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. As I said, I will send out this presentation in the next day or so.
Oh, it was very very clear. Very clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for that.
Hey, cool.
All right.
Awesome. So it's very broadened a whole heap of